Hi, this is Trina Gregory. In this video, I'm going to demonstrate handling GUI components for your Mad Libs lab. First of all, I'm going to open up the document outline so you can see the components I've already added to the lab. To my storyboard, you can see I already have a image view, I have text fields, I have a segment to control, I have a view, and then I have various components on the view. So I'll open it up here and you can see all the components from labels, slider, stepper, segment to control, and switch. And at the bottom, I have a button. To add these components, you can use the library down here and search and add the components. One thing I want you to note is that the view is a view, not a view controller, which will create a new scene, like a new window. When you search for view, you want it to be a view, and you have to scroll down and actually find a view. Not a text view, not a scroll view, just a view, a rectangular region. Now let's hook up some of these components and then create the IB outlets and actions that we need. So first, we are going to do an IB outlet for this view. I'm going to close our inspector over here, and I'm going to bring up the assistant. I'm going to open up the M file, the implementation file. I already have some IB outlets for my text fields. Now I want an IB outlet for this view because we want the less and more segmented control to be able to hide and show the view. So I'm going to control, click, drag, and create an IB outlet for my view. I'm going to call it More Options View. You can call your property whatever you want to call it. Now let's work on the temperature. So this temperature, I first just said a label saying set current temperature. You need to use a slider. It doesn't have to be for temperature. It can be whatever kind of option you want. Here is a label that's displaying the current temperature. I'm going to go back to my regular assistant. So now let's talk about using a slider. For my slider, I'm using temperature. For you, it doesn't have to be temperature. It can be whatever kind of option you want. Here we have a label. And this label, when the slider changes, I want to update this label. Now, I want to show you the slider first. Is in the slider, you get to change the values. You get to change your minimum and maximum. They can be whatever you want. And then you set the current value. So I'm just going to set it at 70 degrees. That means when I come in here to my label, I'm going to give it the default value of 70 as well. Now I need to have an outlet for this label because when the slider changes, I want to update it. Hide this view, go back to my assistant, and create an IB outlet. Call it temperature label. Now for the slider, you can see on the slider we need an IB action. I've already created the IB action. It's called slider value changed. So I've already created this method here, but I don't have a connection to it. So if you have not already created your method, you can control click from the slider to your implementation file and it will start your method for you. Since I already have my method, I'm just going to take this here and click it over here, and that will connect it. Now we do need to make sure that our event is the right event. I'm going to go back to the regular editor, bring up over here, and this last option on our inspector is the connections, and you can see that the connection is value changed, and that's the event we want. Is when this value changes, we want to call our method slider value changed. So that is correct. So now I'm going to go back here and let's look at the method itself. Slider value changed. So what we're doing here, this method is going to pass through us the sender, which is the object that it's being called from. So that's the slider. We need to cast this sender, because right now it's just being passed as an ID. We're going to cast it into a slider. So this is just creating a variable of type UI slider, and we're taking the sender that's being passed in, the argument being passed in, and casting it to a UI slider. From there, we can say, hey, we can get the value of that slider. So we can get the value of the slider. I'm going to create a string with that value. If I want to just display an int of it, then I'm casting it to an int. And because I have a temperature label, which is my IB outlet for the temperature label, I can say self.temperatureLabel.text equals the temperature that I get from the value. So now it's setting that value for us. I'm going to go back to the storyboard. Now let's talk about our stepper. So for our stepper, we have our stepper here. We have a label. My stepper is asking you to put the number of pets. You can ask it to put whatever values you want. Just needs to be a number. It will give us back a number, an integer. So here I have my stepper. You can give it a max, a min and a max, so I can say that you can't have less than 0 pets. If you do have a value where you want a negative value, you can change the min. You can also set what the current value starts with and the steps. So if you wanted to step up by 5s or 2s or 100s, you could do that. Now, when the stepper changes, I want to update this label here. So once again, I need an IB outlet. I'm going to go to my assistant editor, and I'm going to create an IB outlet for this label. Control, click, and I'm going to call it the pets label. There we go. Now I have my stepper. I want an IB action for it. So I'm going to, usually I could just click here and insert action and we create a new one using value changed. I already created my method here, so I'm just going to connect it. There. And now let's talk about the value changed. Our steps value changed, once again, it'll pass as a sender object. We're going to cast it to a UI stepper in this case. And then from that stepper, from the value, there's a property value, we can get the number from it. So I'm just creating a local variable here and a string, number of pets, where I can take the value and then I'm going to set my pets label. I just created my IB outlet with my pets label. So now we have our stepper connected correctly. So we've done these. Now for our segmented control here, for our favorite animal, we just need this value when we want to create the story. So we do not need an IB action. iOS will automatically handle the clicking, the touching of the different options. All we need is an IB outlet. So once again, I'm going to go into my assistant view and I'm going to create an IB outlet for it. And I'm going to call it Animal Segmented Control. The same is true of our switch down here, is I just need this value when we're ready to create our story. So I need an IB outlet for it as well. So I will control, click, drag, and create an IB outlet. Happy ending switch. Now that we have all this working, all these components working on our view, now let's talk about showing and hiding the view. So I've actually already created an IB action for it, but if I hadn't, I could click here, click and drag, and create an IB action for my segment control with the value change event. I've already done that, so I'm just going to connect my method that I have here, I've already created, and connect it. Now let's look at this method. Less more segmented control changed. So this is a case where depending on the value of the segmented control, which index is touched, we want to either hide or show the view. I've already created an IB outlet on the view, that's this here, more options view. So all I need to do is there is a property on any UI view, there's a property called hidden, and it will show or hide the view. So we can set the property hidden to yes, and it will hide the view. We can show the property hidden to no, and it will show the view. So through the sender, I'm going to get the segment control object, reference to the object, just creating a variable of type UI segment control. From that segmented control, I'm getting the index, which is a number. It's going to be 0 for the first one, and then 1 for the next, and if there was more, 1, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and on. So if our segment is 0, that's the first element, that's our less. I want to hide it, so self.more options view.hidden equals yes. Else, which means the segment is not 0, or in this case there's only 2 options, so 1, I'm going to say self more options view dot hidden equals no, and that will show or hide the view. So I will come back here to our storyboard, and so now we know that we want this to be hidden. Our less or more, you can see the first option is less, which means we want to initially have it hidden. So I'm going to come into my Attributes Inspector, click on the view, and I need to click this hidden. This will make sure that when it initially comes up, it's hidden. It grays it out for you. It looks kind of funny, and that's why I waited till the end to do this. So now it will show or hide it for us. Now we want to work on our create story. So this is our button. We already know how to connect buttons. We need an IB action. I've already created an IB action. So there's an IB action in my controller, and it is create story button touched. Now when the create story button touched, what we want to do is bring up an action sheet. So here I am creating a variable, a local variable action sheet of type UI action sheet. When you if you start typing UI action sheet equals, and then you say, hey, I want a UI action sheet alloc, and start typing init, it will have, this is the method you want, init with title. And then you can actually tab through and change all the values. I've already done that. I'm going to delete that really quick, and I'll show you the values I changed for. Just so you can see it a little bit easier, I'm going to come in here, put this here. So UI action sheet alloc, init with title, you pass it in a string for the title. Delegate, we've talked about delegates. We want to have this object, this class that we're working in, be the delegate. And that means that this class needs to implement any delegate methods. So we're going to say the delegate is self. We said the title is it story time? So then the cancel button will be no. And then the other button will be absolutely. If you put it as the destructive button, then it will automatically have the color red. And once we set all this, then we have to say, hey, action sheet, you need to show it in the current view. So to do this, I originally just said action sheet. I started typing show, and you can see the main method that we want to use is show in view. And we basically want it to be in our current view, self.view. There. And this will bring up our action sheet. Now, when we tell it to bring it up, you can see here that this is just an action sheet variable. It's like it goes away. It brings up the action sheet for us, but it's not waiting in this method to wait for which button is touched. What we need to do here is we need to say, hey, our class here handles action sheets. So up here at the top, I've said that I am an action sheet delegate. That's what I did right here. So if you didn't have it here, all you'd have to do is start typing UI action sheet delegate. I'm just hitting tabs, and there you go. It's saying, hey, I'm an action sheet delegate. And the method that we need for action sheet delegates is this method here. So we implement this delegate method. And this delegate method is clicked button on index. So off of the action sheet, there's a clicked button on index. So it's passing us the action sheet. So it's passing us basically a reference to this object that's created. And then it's also going to pass us the button that was touched. So here we're checking to see if the button touched is not equal to the cancel button, which our cancel button says no, our cancel button, then we want to create our story. So I created a separate method called create story. You can see it here, create story. And this here is saying, hey, call a method called create story right here in this object. So that's how we call a method right here in the same class. Now I need to implement my create story method. I have some local variables. I'm going to have a variable for message. That's my message that I'm end up going to display to the user. I'm going to create some NS strings for animal, ending, and title. First here, I'm going to check to see that all my text fields from the top, that their length, that the length of the text fields, if it equals 0, that means that the user didn't enter anything. The placeholder will show up, but the user actually didn't tap. So I'm going to set my title to be error, and I'm going to set my message to be enter information in the text fields. If the text field length is greater than 0, then I'm going to start creating my message for my story. First, this is going to show you how to get the information from your segmented control for your animal. So I have this IB outlet, animal segmented control. So to access it, I type self.animal segmented control. And then we can do the selected segment index. And it will go in the order from left to right. So the first one was koala, the second one's tiger, the third one's monkey, the fourth one's turtle. So I'm just using a switch statement just like you use in other programming languages. Then I'm going to create my message. From it, I am going to use the init with format. So NS mutable string, alloc, init with format. And here I'm creating my string. And then in here I have format specifiers. Okay? For different stuff I'm going to pass into it. So for name, so this is where you create your fun story. Self.textfield.text to replace this one here, the first one. The second one I'm replacing with place textfield.text, then age textfield.text. Don't get confused by these \n's. Those are just a way to put carriage returns in my message. I'm getting my animal. I'm first getting my temperature, self.temperature label, because it's already being updated by my slider, so I just need to get the value of my temperature label. Now my animal, I just created a local variable for it, so here we go here. Because I don't want to display the index, I want to display a value for it. My pets label, I can just use petslabel.text. Then if it's a happy ending, so this is how we get the information from the switch. So for my switch, there's a property called isOn. And you say, how do you know that? You can always look up the documentation. So if I option and then hover over switch and then click on it, you can see I can get the UI switch class reference. I think because of, it's not working, I think because of iOS 8 and they're moving over their documentation. So here's the class reference because they're adding their stuff for Swift and Objective-C. So they're updating their documentation. So for UI switch, one thing you can see here, you can setting the on-off state. It's a Boolean that determines the on-off state. So because it's a Boolean, you can see that it's a Boolean. And then in Objective-C, it's a property. And the getter is on. So this is how we know that we're going to use the isOn. So if my switch is on, then they all lived happily ever after. You add some happy message. If it's a sad ending, then add some sad message. Then I append this ending. What I'm doing here is just appending it to my message, which is my local variable here. Ending is also just a local variable. Title is a local variable. I'm setting it your Mad Lib story. And then after all of this is done, I set up an alert. I'm saying I'm going to create my alert. If it makes it easier, you can kind of see all the different pieces to this. We have message, delegate self, if we actually add different buttons, then we need to handle those different buttons. For right now, we only, in our alert, we're just having the one button, the done button. And by default, the cancel button, if you click on the cancel button, it will make the alert go away. So hopefully that makes sense, and now let's demonstrate it. I'm going to click Build and Run. And here's a demonstration. When we click on More, we have the More options. We click Less, it has the Less options. The name, bring up our text field down here so people can enter a name. I've implemented the background button as well as you can see, the Done button, just like we did in the previous lab. And so you can learn about that from the iOS Connections video. If I hit Create Story without entering stuff, it says, is it story time? Absolutely, and we get an error. You could actually, if you want to put an alert right away instead of putting the action sheet first. It's up to you. Now let's actually put in information. So I will put my name, my place. Right now I'm at USC, so I'll put USC. My age, I'll lie and put 21. I'll put more options. The temperature, it's been very warm out today. It's, I think, in the 90s. Number of pets, I have 2. Out of these, my favorite animal would be the turtle. Of course, I want a happy ending. There's off and there's on. Create story, is it story time? If you click anywhere else, remember no cancel button is displayed on the iPad. It'll go away, basically does a cancel. If I hit absolutely, then I get my story. I've, of course, just put some text here so you can, making sure I get all the information. I click on the Done button. And there is Mad Libs.